So, Jocelyn, welcome. Thank you very
you.
much. Why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about your career path from Stanford student to a director of engineering at Facebook?
Boy, I could probably spend the entire lecture just answering this question. Well, when I was a student, I really had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I had majored in computer science because I loved programming. I loved the logic and the sort of analytical nature of it. But I didn't really have like a super clear idea of what being a software engineer was like, even after multiple summer internships. And so I joined, straight out of college, I joined a company called Trilogy that was based in Austin, Texas, mainly because Trilogy had a very different recruiting pitch than a lot of the other big software companies. Most of the software companies were saying things like, well, you know, come work for us and just make software. And Trilogy was like, well, come work for us and do a little of this and a little of that, and we'll expose you to a lot of things. And so I went, and it was kind of true. It was a very chaotic company, but I made great friends and just was sort of put in situations where it was a very entrepreneurial environment, actually, because you just kind of had to figure out what to do and deliver, and sort of not know any boundaries. There was not, you know, a lot of structure or processes to follow. You just had to figure out what to do to succeed. And I made great friends there, including 3 with whom I went on to co-found a startup. Which was, again, I wrote code, I tested the code, I wrote documentation, I supported the customers, I deployed the software, I did everything. I hired people, I hired the front office manager, I stocked the fridge. So it was really terrific. And somewhere in there, I also started managing people. And I found that when I was managing engineers, it sort of finally plugged in for me that this was actually my right career path, because I've been always fascinated by people as well as by technology. I was actually a minor in symbolic systems. Terry Winograd was my advisor. I concentrated in HCI. And so I was taking tons of psychology and linguistics classes at Stanford. You want to blow your mind, take a linguistics class, the same class you take, the same quarter you take compilers, and you will find you were studying the same thing, but from different sides. And so being a manager, I found, was a lot about social engineering, and it was a lot about understanding what made people tick and what made teams tick, and there were just really interesting, difficult structural and systems problems to solve of the human kind, as well as of the technology kind. So it was like, yes, at last, like every neuron in my brain is firing, and I'm also just motivated to bring my A game by other people, by my teammates, by my colleagues. The reason founding a startup was amazing was because, you know, I was working 120-hour weeks. I was working in crazy town. But I was thrilled every minute because I was coming through for my team, and they were coming through for me. The startup, though, did reach sort of a point where we were doing a major strategic pivot, and I was ready to move on. And I was ready to come back to Silicon Valley. I also married a Stanford grad. We were another computer science major. And he and I had kind of made this pact that we would be in Austin for no more than 2 to 4 years, that as 2 Stanford CS grads, we were obviously destined to be based in Silicon Valley. We had been in Texas for over 5 years at this point, with the startup. And so we decided to come back to California. And in California, I ran into a really good friend of mine from school, Jeremy Sugarman, who had joined a startup founded by one of our professors, by my OS professor, actually, Mendel. And it was called VMware. And I tried to hire Jeremy for my company. He wouldn't come. He went to Mendel's company instead. And so this was a couple years later. VMware was now 350 people, still pretty small. I'd only pulled an A- in the OS class. I had been doing nothing related to operating systems since, but I said, what the heck? I went in to meet VMware. The recruiter told me, boy, if I had found your resume on my own, like I would have thrown it in the trash can, basically, because you have no operating systems experience, and that's what I've been told to look for. But on Jeremy's recommendation, they talked to me, and we just clicked. So I joined VMware as a manager. I dusted off my operating systems textbook and remembered what Scatter-Gather was all about. And when I joined VMware, I kind of got on a rocket. VMware does not have maybe the consumer brand sex appeal of a Facebook or a Google, but they absolutely were doubling revenue and headcount every year, and they proceeded to do that for 4 or 5 years in a row. So I joined in 2003 when it was 350 people. And when I left in 2010, it was over 10,000. And I really grew up with VMware, and I still had that same quality of wanting to come through for my team and of taking no prisoners, of like really just wanting to have the most impact I could have. And something that was really exciting about being at VMware was our customers were all geeks, and they loved us. They loved VMware. We were transformative for what they were trying to do. It was like science fiction because they could solve problems they couldn't solve without us. And so that was just an amazing feeling that we were building something that was changing how people worked and making their lives better. But as VMware grew to over 10,000 people, I guess my career rose. I should talk about the fact that when I joined VMware as a manager and I left as a vice president. But I never really thought, there was never a moment where I walked into my boss's office and said, where's my next promotion coming from? I was always just thinking about how do I have the most impact I can have on the company, on my team, on our users. And I think that by just trying to have impact, my career kind of took care of me. And so it was. I never really thought of myself as consciously managing my career. But I left VMware finally when it was over 10,000 people, and I decided I was ready for another really big shift, and I wanted to make the jump from enterprise to consumer. And where better to discover consumer than Facebook? And I actually originally planned to go to a very small company, and I was not looking to join a company. Even then, Facebook was almost 2,000 people. I'd never voluntarily joined a company that big. I had joined companies that were a few hundred people or started my own. And so really kind of just talked to Facebook as a, really kind of just to get aware, to learn more about the space. And Facebook's head of engineering, Mike Schreffer, was a classmate of mine from Stanford, too. He was fellow 97 grad, fellow section lead, too. And so we had lunch. And I just kept talking to startups around the Valley, and I kept talking to Facebook. And I would go sleep at night, and I would talk things over with my husband. And Facebook had more of the qualities of a startup that I was looking for than the small startups I was talking to. And there was no question after I met him that Mark Zuckerberg was by far the most impressive founder of all the founders I met, which is sort of a trite thing to say in hindsight. Like, that's sort of a duh. But Mark was amazing, and Facebook had the culture of a startup. And so, I gritted my teeth and said, well, this doesn't match it doesn't check any of the boxes I said I had other than consumer, but what the heck, this is clearly what I want to do in my gut. So I went to Facebook. Have been there 3 years, have had an amazing, amazing run. I've gotten to work on really just great products that I use every day, photos, newsfeed, now our mobile platform. So I couldn't be happier.
So let's drill down. You said the culture of Facebook was amazing, and you walked in and it felt so comfortable. Can you paint a picture of the culture